There's an old Jesuit writer from the early part of the 20th century, D'Arcy is his last name. He wrote a book called The Nature of Belief that is quite good. I highly recommend it. There's a line that I found particularly intriguing early in the book on page 58. He writes, "The difference between an idiot and a wise man has been described as lying in this, that the first has one idea which devours or is dissociated from the rest of his mind, while the second has one mastering idea which embraces and systematizes all the rest. The mental life of the idiot contracts, that of the wise man expands, and in this expansion the personality is more and more integrated." I think if there's anything that our world desperately needs and longs for, I think, it is integration. Integration meaning by that wholeness, that all the parts of the human soul in this case are integrated well together. There's nothing more disappointing, I think, for most of us with our own selves or with others that we greatly respect than to find deep disintegration and disharmony within them. I think this is one of the reasons why there's so much disappointment with people in high positions of power or authority. I speak as a Catholic, for example. There's so much disappointment with leaders in the church doing terrible things or doing things against other persons that are fundamentally contrary to everything that our faith is about. Our faith is about a God who loved the world so much that he embraces our humanity in Jesus Christ. And so the very notion that I would represent that faith and then abuse another human being or treat them as a mere object for my own selfishness is so fundamentally opposed and contradictory to everything that we profess that it brings a deep disgust and a deep sadness to all of us to see that. But we shouldn't just point fingers at other people. We can also look at our own lives, no matter what our position is in the world, whether a person's a Christian or not. I think we all experience disappointment when we see people who profess one thing, but then their life speaks a totally different thing. I think in part this is because we all long for integration. We want to be whole. We want to be at peace within. We want the various parts of the soul to be in harmony. And so if there is, for example, we struggle with all types of temptations, especially in a society where there are so many resources. And so the more resources, the more we're tempted to abuse those resources. So I might eat too much, I might drink too much, I might sleep too much, or I might work too much. And so all of these things tend to generate a kind of self-centeredness that then in turn can lead to me being consumed by my own appetites. So remember the old seven major vices that are often listed of, beginning with pride. If I turn inward to myself, these seven deadly sins, if I turn inward upon myself, and that's the starting point for everything, is serving myself, then I find myself, the more resources I have, with the second of the deadly sins, avarice, I find myself just feeding myself and wanting more and more. That leads me to resent other people who have things that I don't, or who get attention that I don't, in the third of the deadly sins of envy. And then that can lead me to anger, where I am unjustly angry with another person because of something trivial or for something that has nothing to do with justice, but has instead to do with things that in some way damage my pride. And then, of course, that leads to things like lust and gluttony, and then finally to sloth, where I lose all energy to be attentive to the spiritual good of my own soul. And I then lose that fervency or desire to do anything about my condition as a human being. Going back to D'Arcy's comment here, he describes the idiot, or we might say the foolish person, the person without good sense. They become obsessed with an idea, or they become obsessed with one thing, and that closes in upon itself so that it doesn't result in the growing expansion of that idea to encompass and envelop the whole person's life in a meaningful way. So for instance, with myself, with being a Christian, My appetites that say for food and drink, or for sleep, or for pleasure, or whatever, those things are seen, or should be seen, in relationship to other virtues and other goods that I'm seeking after. In other words, the good of the body is not the end all. There are also other things, the good of the mind, the good of the will, and all of these other appetites should be integrated with those. What does this have to do with faith? Well, it has a lot to do with faith, because in the context of religious faith, and I'm not just speaking about Christian faith here, religious faith has to do with embracing an idea, usually a central idea, certainly integrated or connected to many other ideas, subsidiary ideas or connected ideas, but there's usually a central genius to a religious faith. There's a central insight or notion that becomes the unifying principle or the insight that envelops everything else. In the case of Christianity, that central insight is that God loved the world into being and shared in his very creation in Christ, and that allows us or gives us an opportunity to share in the divine nature, to be united together with God. Much, much more to say about that. But what I would say here to conclude these short observations, what I would say is that all of us want integration. We want to be internally at harmony and at peace. And the only way to get to that is through discovering an insight or a truth that gives us the key to explaining and integrating every other feature of life, every other part of our being. And if a person is interested in that or wants that or desires that, I think that's a stepping stone or an entry point into faith, into religious faith.